goes to Chris Benjamin for Living the Dirt. It's pretty Canadian of the Atlantic Writing Competition to award the grand prize to a novel that begins, "Toronto, is everything good and everything bad about the city?" I'm trying to remember the good. But despite ourselves, Living the Dirt is a fine effort and an excellent first novel. It's well written with fully realized characters, an engrossing plot, strong voices, and emotional power. Given the current book market, it'll still take some serendipity and chutzpah for the ink to be drying on that eventual contract. But we're hoping this prize will help wend Chris's fine effort on its way. Congratulations, Chris.
Thank you very much to the Writers' Federation, I just want to say that first of all, for putting on this contest. And as has been mentioned numerous times, the provision of feedback is a huge benefit. And based on the feedback, I've actually changed the beginning of the novel. It no longer starts with Toronto. I took a part that I had cut and put it back in because there were certain flow issues. And I agreed with the feedback I got, so it was very helpful. And thank you also to the Federation for being an uncompromising advocate for writers. It's something I've been impressed with ever since I returned to this, my home province. And I also just want to thank my cheering section over there. Without them and others like them, this book wouldn't exist at all. Without further ado, I'll read from The New Beginning, or close to it. And despite the fact that it's early in the book, I'll just explain a tiny bit of context that this is all happening in Indonesia, on a small fishing island, but it's being narrated by a Torontonian social worker. Here we go. The fantastic voyage began on a sandy blue paradise for fishermen and their children, renting snorkeling equipment to drive by tourists in 1973. This is where and when Bhumi was born, his face all small and crinkly, brown and wide-eyed wonder at the implausibility of being plucked from his mother's womb while she lay bleeding on a dirt floor, silently and stubbornly refusing to cry out of the pain of birth. He was the Bugis boy with a Javanese name chosen by his Javanese mother. She had, for the most part, let her own traditions slip away as the years and the island colluded to make her their own. Rilaka became her new motherland, its Buginese language her lingua franca. Her firstborn's name was a tribute to that natal part of her, and because it meant earth in her faraway mother tongue, it honored the place of his birth in a multicultural chorus. From the beginning, Bhumi's eyes pierced harder than any other, glowing while his father forced him to try football, glowing brightly at the chance to help the man count market money from mainland fish sales. By age 3, he humbled his father by becoming a faster and more accurate bookkeeper, who also spoke better Indonesian, a skill his father exploited for price negotiations with mainlanders. By age 5, he bored of accounting and took to engineering, devising a cheap and effective net flotation device out of 2-liter pop bottles washed up along the shore. Bhumi's father, a wiry man with surprising strength and audaciously self-granted authority, went looking for the boy late one evening after Bhumi failed to come home for supper. On their tiny island of 100 people, any child not found in 5 minutes was assumed drowned. Bhumi's father, Yusufu, was not worried. Bhumi was no likely drowning victim, the first 4-year-old potentially smarter than the sea. Yusufu found Bhumi on the far sloping side of the island where no one had ever bothered to build or settle. It was simply too far away from the others. In recent years, it had become a place where the women gathered to make clothing when they wanted to get away from the tourists. Bhumi was there cursing a foul black streak the likes of which Yusufu hadn't heard in all his years on boats, not from his father or grandfather or any other man he'd known. "Bhumi, what's wrong?" he shouted, half in anger and half in concern, a magical mix of fatherly emotion that keeps us from being a threat to ourselves at a young age. "I can't get it tied," Boomy retorted, pointing in frustration at a small tangle of netting he'd somehow dragged across the village and 30 empty plastic pop bottles. "My fingers are too small." "Why do you want to tie them?" Yusufu asked. The sharpness in his voice was all but gone. "You tie them at one end to make it float. Then you can leave and go play," Boomy explained. "Then you can come back and you have fish. So then you have more time to play with me, Daddy." Yusufu was not an exceptionally hard-working man, but he did spend 6 hours a day at sea. 6 hours Boomy felt would be better spent playing with him. While flotation nets have existed in many other fishing cultures for centuries, Rilaka's more labor-intensive methods were ingenious for keeping the men out of the women's hair for 6 hours a day, and vice versa, and for making physically strong, hardy men for an island left naked in the exposure of rain and merciless sun. Most human beings survive on tradition their whole lives, and Yusufu had much in common with most human beings, especially the men of Rilaka. His son Boomy was among the rare few whose novel ideas changed the way a species like ours lives, and indirectly changed the way all life lives or dies. Like most human innovations, Boomy's idea had unforeseen impacts. The lighter workload and greater cash flow that came their way once Yusufu caught on and got to time what Boomy's little fingers couldn't coordinate, resulted not in more playtime with his father, but less. And the time he did spend with the man became much less pleasant. Yusufu and the other Rilakan fishers had never before felt any need for alcohol, which was technically forbidden. Not being pious men, finding themselves with unprecedented time on their hands, and not being in any particular hurry to return to their families, they decided to stop into a little bar with a live musician near the seaport. The toxins in the liquor put the inexperienced drinkers in a collectively ill mood, and most of them disliked the numbing effect of too many drinks. Only Yusufu's stubborn obstinance pushed him forward until he had drunk more than his fill several nights in a row. His cohorts would keep him company and switch to coffee after just one glass of strong rum. For Yusufu, the new practice became his habit after the others had tired of alcohol. It was a week into the experiment that Boomy learned what betrayal really felt like. He had heard many stories of betrayal from his uncle Karsi, the world's greatest storyteller, and in them the dastardly deeds were swiftly repaid vigilante style. From Karsi's words, Boomy imagined that betrayal was merely a seed of desire for revenge. The first time Yusufu hit him forever changed his understanding of pain. There was no desire in it at all, just deep disappointment. He had stayed up late, determined to see his father before dream time. He had refused to come home, afraid that sleep would take him if he got too comfortable. Instead, he stayed by the shore, playing long after the tourists had returned to the mainland and the other children had gone to sleep. He drew pictures in the sand with a stick to pass the hours long past sunset, and even past midnight, bleary-eyed and obsessed with the single thought of his father. When the boats finally returned, Boomy ran to them and watched open-mouthed as the other man helped his father over the gunwale. Yusufu retched and spit into the sea he always told Boomy was sacred. "Daddy!" Boomy cried, thinking Yusufu was hurt. He ran to him and pushed through the other men to offer a hand. Yusufu looked down at Boomy and sneered. "What are you doing up?" he demanded. Boomy swallowed and looked up at Yusufu, who pulled back at his matted salt and pepper hair. Even hunched over, Yusufu towered over the boy like a giant sea creature lurching onto the land. "Waiting for you," Boomy said. The men laughed and one tousled Boomy's hair. "He misses you," one of them told Yusufu, who smiled a shy, bemused smile, took the boy up into his arms and carried him home. Yusufu kept smiling until he crouched in through the door of their little house. Then he put Boomy down and took him by the arm, looked the boy in the eyes and said, "Don't you ever embarrass me like that again." He gave a half smile and slapped Boomy across the face. Boomy's lips quivered and a tear came to his eye. "Are you going to cry now, son? Are you going to cry now, son?" Yusufu asked. "Are you going to embarrass me further?" Boomy swallowed hard, sucking a head full of tension down his throat. His body was shaking, but he didn't cry. He shook his head solemnly. No, he would not embarrass his father any further. "Good," Yusufu said. "Now get to sleep." Thanks.